Welcome to Rise to Lead, the podcast where heart-driven leaders come together to inspire and innovate. They will share actionable tips and insights that help you lead your team more successfully, advance your career or business as a leader, achieve greater impact, and experience deeper fulfillment. I'm your host, Regina Huber, guiding you through deep conversations about leadership that's rooted in service, freedom, and the desire to leave a positive mark on the world. Hi, and welcome to the Rise to Lead podcast. With me today is a fellow podcast host and a fabulous professional. It's an absolute pleasure for me to have leadership coach Doug Thorpe from Headway Exec and to be able to present him to you, dear listeners. I'm totally delighted to have you on, Doug.
Well, thank you, Regina. It's a pleasure to be here. I enjoyed our time on my show, and it's a blessed opportunity to pay back. So happy to be here.
That's wonderful. You could probably hear the excitement in my voice. And I want to introduce you really quickly to our listeners who might not know you yet. From the Army to the boardroom, Doug Thorpe has been serving in leadership capacities his whole career. After leaving the military, he embarked on a career in banking and financial services, which then led to entrepreneurship, starting 5 companies, and mentoring other leaders to grow and expand those businesses as well. We had a great conversation for your podcast, Doug. Thank you so much for asking me wonderful questions and for making it a very, very entertaining and insightful conversation at the same time. I appreciate that. I was also, of course, thrilled to see our episode top ranked on your Apple Podcast page shortly after it aired. So that was a nice surprise. And I'm again saying this because it's really, really true. I'm delighted to have you on today so that you can share a piece of your tremendous wisdom with the listeners of Rise to Lead.
Well, no pressure. No, it is, like I said, it's a pleasure to be here as well. Looking forward to our chat.
Yes, and I'm sure that you will not disappoint. So that's definitely a sure thing. Doug, to get us started, tell us what inspired you to work in the service of better leadership and also to create your podcast, which is titled Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I love that name, by the way.
Well, thank you. Yeah, the whole idea, the title of the show, Leadership Powered by Common Sense, is a byproduct of my many years in business and out in the world, working both in the corporate sector, in the military, as you alluded. I've done nonprofit work. I've pretty much hit every sector. I've had interests and opportunities in just about every size business. And the thing that I think was the common thread is that the leadership involved is the secret sauce of whether or not the enterprise thrived and produced the output it hoped to. I've been in and around leadership my whole life. We have a joke here in my family. I was captain of the 5th grade crossing guard in school. Back in my day, we actually send kids out into traffic with stop signs to guide the traffic around the schools, and nobody would even think about doing that anymore, but that's the way we did it. And I aspired to be able to lead that squad of fellow students to do that, and was successful in getting there. But it's interesting. People say, yeah, was that an ego trip? And no, it really wasn't. It was just a hunger and a passion I had for kind of helping the little community there at my school, and really believing that that was a good service event. And but as a 11 or 12-year-old, I had no idea what that really was, but I just knew I had it, and that kind of has been with me the rest of the way. And I've also been blessed with many other leadership opportunities, appointments, and designations to do many different things. And I think it comes down to that sense of service. I think I was operating in a servant leader mode before that became a thing. I always looked at my opportunities as just that, finding ways to elevate others. And through my career, I have worked with a lot of great mentors. I've had people that I've been able to emulate and model and create my own patchwork quilt of leadership. And I now, well, actually now for almost 16 years, have been coaching others and advising others on ways that they can become better leaders and take their organizations to new levels.
Yeah, and I'm assuming no casualties back then.
Nope, not a single one. A couple of fender benders, but that wasn't, no kids were involved.
Good. I'm glad. So, yeah, you mentioned that you had this leadership vibe or vein, to call it something, in you already as a young boy. Not everybody is born a leader. We sometimes say that, right? We can learn to be leaders, but some people just really have that aspiration naturally already in them, and they bring it with them as young people. So that's really interesting. Having said that, of course, a lot of people, whether they are business owners or whether they are promoted into a leadership role, into a management role where they also need to practice leadership, oftentimes do not have that. So what would you say to them? We of course know that there are certain leadership skills we all should know, that we all should master ideally, but what would you say to them?
Well, let me first say that related to that, there's an interesting phenomenon I've tracked in my own coaching career. Early when I began coaching, I used to ask clients, "Do you think there's a difference between?" I'm sorry, I used to say, "Is there a difference between management and leadership?" And people would kind of glaze over and go, "Huh?" And it's like, I've never thought about it that way. I don't know that, but what I've watched, there is an enlightenment that has happened in the last 10 or 15 years. And now that question doesn't mean anything because everybody says, of course, there's a difference between management and leadership. So now my question is, what do you think it is? How do you define the difference? And the basis of that comes where, as you alluded, a lot of people get promoted into management roles without ever having the word leadership involved in the promotion. But in fact, you're right. There, as soon as you take on a management duty, whether it's a team leader or department head, there is an immediate challenge to ask yourself the question, can I be a leader here? And the thing I share with clients, I have a good friend and colleague who did a big study of highly successful CEOs. And his big takeaway was his definition of the difference between management and leadership is a simple one, kind of back to the common sense idea. He sums it all up in saying management is about process and leadership is about people. And I've thought about that many times, and I do believe it's true. Management, people can make a career of being a manager, getting a process done, getting the numbers achieved, getting the product out the door. That can be an effective management exercise. But the challenge there is when you look at the body of work, how are the people doing? What's the culture like? What's the climate like? What's the turnover rate? What's the retention rate? What are the people dynamics? And sadly, and I don't have any scientific data to back it up, it's just experiential and data. And that is, most of those cases when the person in charge has been nothing but a manager, cracking the whip, turning the screws to get the process done, the people side of things, the numbers don't look good. Usually high turnover, no continuity, no longevity, frequent retraining, retooling, restaffing, and it's just not an optimized process. And even though they're achieving numbers and getting their revenues and making their earnings, it could be more.
Right.
And by applying leadership principles, you can start embracing the human element of the work being done, and you can get higher productivity, higher throughput, better margin, all those things.
Right. It's about the churn, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the turnover
Right.
cost, which is high.
Right.
The higher the salary, the higher the turnover cost, we sometimes say.
Right.
It's a huge percentage. It's also not just the cost in money, it's the cost in time, new training, new whatnot, right? Yes. And what I see sometimes on LinkedIn is also a somewhat false distinction between management and leadership, which puts management down as something not valuable. But that's not true either, because it is something valuable. It's just a different animal.
Mm-hmm.
Management is necessary. Leadership is different. And ideally, we have the two together.
Right.
Would you agree with
Right.
that?
I agree. I think the most successful business leaders have conquered the management challenges. They have figured out how to run a project or run a process and steer and guide the technical side of whatever they may need to be doing. But they've cashed in on the opportunity to get in the hearts and minds of the people that work for them and really elevate. And one dynamic that we should talk about here is the reality that every human being on the planet has another gear that they can operate in if they choose. It's a discretionary effort idea. It's kind of popularly referred to as going the extra mile or the 110%. And that is a choice that only the individual can make. A manager cannot, squeeze it out of them to get there. They can demand overtime, they can demand extra time, but are you really getting extra effort when you ask for that? And it's only the individual that can give that extra effort, that second gear. And a leader can inspire people to give that, not only give it once, but give it on a regular basis. And when a leader can create clarity about the work and a focus and a sense of purpose and meaning, hey, gang, we're serving a greater good. When they can really embed that inspiration in the people are going to be more prone to showing up and giving that extra effort day by day. And extra effort can be shown in very small ways. I frequently use the example, two coworkers are standing there talking and one says, man, I almost forgot my kid has this thing at school this afternoon. I didn't really plan for it, but I really want to be there. And the coworker says, oh, go do it. I got you. I know what you're doing. I'll cover it. I'll be happy to help. Well, that's that extra effort. And the boss isn't even involved in it, but the leader has created a climate where those coworkers are willing to work like that with each other. And the one guy offers the extra effort because he knows another day his coworker will pay it back.
Yeah, I love that. So it's all about the voluntary engagement, not the forced
Right.
engagement. Of course, we can inspire, as you said, and promote higher engagement through certain ways, and by creating a specific culture, for example. But also, yes, we want that enthusiasm, not just the time of people, right? We want their creativity. We
Right.
want, yes, and that collaboration and ideally even co-creation, when we have created also this trust and this team spirit. We're going to talk about trust a little bit later more. Now, for now, I'm curious, Doug, how do heart-centered leadership and leadership powered by common sense fit together for you?
Yeah. Well, I think the heart-centered leadership for me is, every time I hear that and think about it, I come back to the sense of passion and purpose. Do you, for a leader to look in the mirror and ask him or herself the question, what am I really passionate about? What do I really believe in? Where do I really think this situation can go? And really get centered on the drive for that. And as soon as you start finding yourself at cross odds with the organization you might be a part of, there is a real challenge on the ability to show up and really operate with that sense of your own personal inspiration for what you believe you're going to be able to do. And then my tagline, leadership powered by common sense, I guess for me a lot of that goes back to my military training days. In the military, we excuse me, we were big on the keep it simple principle, and what that really meant was very clear, distinct communication, not a lot of chatter and superfluous detail around a situation. It was literally like, we're at point A and we need to get to point B. Here's how we're going to get there. Just boom. And a lot of that came down to some common sense type explanation, planning, and communication. And what I see in the world, ever increasing day by day, is a kind of complexity and ambiguity that people are really struggling with. It's one thing to have all this amazing technology around us, and that puts a premium on learning and experience for sure. But when you've got to make decisions, you can't get into the weeds about all of that technical stuff. You've got to rise above that or put it aside, as it were, and just get back to that. We're at point A. How do I get to point B? And I'll tell you a quick story on my tagline and title, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Many years ago, when I first was launching my show and my marketing around it, I was interviewing a marketing agency, and they immediately heard that and they said, "Oh, we hate that tagline. You're going to have to do something different." I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, that's so presumptuous and it's so off-putting." And I said, "It's only off-putting to the people that don't have common sense. So you're fired. We're not going to work together."
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, it was definitely not a fit. They probably would have overcomplicated for you.
And that, you're right, and that was what was being indicated. So no, I have hung on to it, and I do get a lot of people that respond to it in a way saying, "Thank you for reminding me that I need to." And it's not about dumbing something down. It's about creating clarity.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually thinking about the word clarity when you were telling this story right now, right? And we want to talk more about clarity. It's such a critical word in leadership. I totally agree with you on that. So why is clarity so important for leaders? And I heard you say once even that clarity might be the job number one for leaders. Explain to us.
I do think it is. I think it's quite possibly the top of the stack in terms of if you want to lead and inspire people, you've got to create clarity for them. And I borrow a page out of some sales training that I learned a few years ago, or I was reminded of it. I learned it many years ago, but I was reminded of it a few years ago. A confused mind says no. And I thought about that. And of course, in the sales context, you're a salesman and you've got a prospect in front of you and you're just dazzling them with features and benefits and function and blah, 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 blah. And you're throwing the user manual at them and they glaze over, you've lost the sale. They've become confused. They can't even maybe remember why they were considering buying, and now they're gone. Well, guess what? The same thing is true in leadership. If you're standing in front of your team and you're saying, here's our next big initiative, here's our next big project, blah, 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 and you see everybody glaze over, you've just lost them. They maybe don't even remember what you told them the objective was going to be or the goal was going to be. So it's on the leader to try to create that clarity, to break it down into the bite-sized chunks that people can absorb and grab onto. And it starts with that sense of mission, vision. Here's the vision of where we're going. Let me paint the picture for you. And let's keep that picture on the wall. Let's keep it out in front of us. And I would also argue that great leaders have this massive mural in their mind, this huge landscape of where they want to go and what all might be involved to get there. But they can't dump that on every person in their organization. They can't expect every person to capture that same massive, detailed, beautiful mural vision. The leader has to take it into pieces, kind of like undoing a puzzle, that 3,000 piece puzzle you just put together. The leader needs to have that picture, but now they need to start taking it apart and taking those chunks of puzzle and give it to the team that's going to be executing that and break those pieces down to them to that point of perfect clarity to get them started, get them moving. Then you can layer on complexities as things go on. You can add to the puzzle as the team proves that they've embraced the idea, and as they start grasping the vision, then you can elaborate with more details. But you can't do it the other way around.
Absolutely. Yes, we have the big vision, the big picture. And then we have smaller subvisions potentially, like a team vision for a particular team, right?
Right.
Was helpful as well as a subvision, so that then you can determine the specific goals for that group or team, which might be, more or less complex than
Right.
the big goals, depending on what the big vision looks like and what company it is for and what product or whatever situation it is for. Okay, yes, that's very well explained. Thank you for sharing this with us. Now, of course, we also know that clarity has a huge part in and a very critical role in communication. And communication is one of the most important leadership skills. So I think it just ties into what you already said, but would you like to add anything that's specific to communication?
Yeah, well, for sure, communication is what drives the ability to create clarity. The way we communicate, the way we express ourselves as leaders is so critical for being able to create that clarity. and have that sense of purpose. I I frequently talk about communication as being a four-part exercise. Some people say it's a two-way street, but I go, yeah, but there's four parts to that. One is the idea that ruminates in your head, and that's kind of step one, is just formulating your thought and try to get it processed to be as impactful as it can. But then second step is your expression of it, whether it's spoken or written, you're putting it out there. And how many times have we all said, oh, that didn't come out the way I was thinking about it? Well, that's a demonstration. That's an example of the breakdown between step one and two. Step three is when the other person receives it. They're going to have their own filters or potentially triggering words that you might pack into the message, unaware that some word you used or some phrase you used is actually a trigger for somebody else. So they don't hear the exact meaning. And a classic example of that, albeit an overemphasized example, is just the whole idea of people who maybe English is not their first language, and you're trying to speak English to them, and you say something that's a little bit colloquial or specialized, and maybe that's an element they haven't quite learned in learning the language, and they're going, what so there's this, it's lost in translation. That's step three. But ultimately, step four is the receiver's processing. When the message they think they heard now goes into their brain to be processed, there can be some gaps and hiccups there as well. And so the challenge that I talk about is that for a leader, you've got to be aware and sensitive to pretty much all four steps. It's really on you. It's not so much on your people. It's really on you. And you can issue a communication and you can get feedback almost immediately. Sometimes body language, even if you're online, there's body language that can be seen, but certainly subsequent performance will be an indicator of whether or not the message was received properly. So you never can, as a leader, make an announcement or make a statement and expect it to land perfectly one time only. It needs some repetition. It needs some feedback looping. It needs some, dialogue, like in one quick way, like in a small team setting, you make your announcement, you make your statement, and then you ask, all right, everybody, what did you hear? What do you think I said? And you don't need to say that in a condescending way, but in a empathetic way. Let's talk about what you think I just said. Let me hear it from you. I want to be sure if you've got any questions or concerns, let's begin talking about them.
Yeah, and a way of saying that is maybe also to say, well, I'm not sure if I was clear. If we referred back to you rather than saying something like, does this make sense to you? And then implying that, it should make sense, right? So we need to sometimes also really be careful with those words as we are requesting feedback so that we actually get feedback that is valuable.
Yeah. I do that in my one-on-one coaching when a client brings me a particularly complex issue and we begin talking about it. If I've got something I share back, I will frequently say, "Does that make sense? Does that fit? Does that work for the situation you're describing?" And they may or may not acknowledge. They may say, well, it's close, but no, I'm really thinking this, and blah 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 blah, and you can really make progress that way with solving issues that may be there, but you can't just cut it off with the initial communication.
Right. And sometimes we have to reframe or rephrase.
Right. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and one important point that I also just quickly want to mention in this conversational flow, as you described it so well, are those blind spots that we all have, conversational blind spots, right? You mentioned some of it too, triggers. Um, it could be just fear, any emotion really. And also the fact that, and I know if already implied that, I just wanted to point it out again, is that our brains tune out and they have to process what we are hearing. And we don't necessarily hear every single word that is said. I think that's
right.
also really important to remember. And this awareness, as you mentioned, as you called it, is then what gives us that possibility of making sure that the message is received.
Right.
Because yes, also how we are perceived isn't always as we think we are perceived, and it all plays into the conversation and into the communication, right?
For sure.
Yeah. So let's tackle another area, which is actually, in my opinion, closely related. And it's also one of my favorite topics when it comes to leadership. How can we build trust at work as leaders?
Great subject, great theme that is receiving more and more attention these days as part of the evolution of leadership. And I point back to in 2016 and 18, the good folks at Google did a big study. They were curious why, for all their effort to hire the best of the best, when people came to work and got assigned to teams, not all teams performed the same. So they embarked on this big study. You can look it up online. It's called Project Aristotle is the output report on it. But the bottom line, in very long story short, what they determined, the difference between high performing teams and lesser performing teams is this notion of psychological safety. Well, when you read the big narrative on that big word, back to common sense, it's good old fashioned trust.
Mm-hmm.
Building an environment of trust where I trust you. I can be my real self. I can show up. I can say what I'm thinking. I'm not going to be afraid of you condemning it or belittling my idea, and vice versa. And you get all this going, and that is when the performance level of the team really spikes up. So after reading that study and doing some other work, a colleague of mine and I put our heads together, and we wrote our own book about trust at work. It's the one on the shelf above us there. And the real premise in it is, when you think about trust at its simplest level, how do we build trust with a person? And I use the dating example. You're a young person, you're attracted to another person, you invite them to go somewhere together, call it a date or call it just going out, whatever you want to call it. What usually happens in that moment, you start having a discussion. You start asking questions. What's your favorite color? What do you like to do? What movies do you like? Where do you like to go? Do you travel much? All those kinds of things are a little bit probative, but they're drawing out information to try to align. And the more times the answers come back in whatever notion of favorable you have, all of a sudden you start saying, well, now I know this person, but now I kind of really like them. Wow. And so the questions get a little deeper and a little more meaningful. And then you finally say, I can really trust this person. And then maybe this is my person. So, let's talk about living together or getting married, whatever your culture may be. Well, guess what, folks? From a leadership standpoint, the same thing happens with the people at work. They have questions. They're curious. They want to know. They need to evaluate whether or not they can trust the team and the environment around them. So, what we talk about in the book is a process for allocating, and that's a fancy word, but it's more maybe accounting for the kinds of questions people are going to ask. And in our study and what we explain in the book, there's really 6 basic areas, thus the diagram on the cover of the book, but the 6 basic areas where these questions ruminate and percolate. And it becomes a little bit of a flywheel as people get, the fundamental questions, baseline questions answered. They can move on to the next level, and they keep building this list of questions, just like we did in our dating scenario. And pretty soon they arrive at that conclusion: I really trust this situation. I trust the boss. I trust the people. I trust the system. I'm happy to be here. And this is where you get back into that notion of that second gear we talked about, that discretionary effort kicking in. And that's what Google discovered. When all of that is settled, everybody kicks in their discretionary effort. And that's why some of those teams perform so much better.
Yes, it is absolutely aligned with what we study in conversational intelligence, which happens to be a methodology I also love. And I like to use it in my coaching approach as well. And we have what we call a conversational dashboard. And when you are in high trust mode, that's when you are in this co-creation mode that we talked about earlier. It's more automatic because you're less skeptical. You are more willing to contribute your best ideas, and you just feel better. It's everybody wants to feel good at work. They want to feel respected, recognized, welcome, and safe. You mentioned it, right? Everybody wants to feel safe. If I'm afraid that what I have to say will be met with ridiculing or something like that, or just be ignored, then I'm less willing to contribute. Right?
Yep.
Yeah, this has been very, very insightful. Thank you so much, Doug. Really great great input here. I think our listeners will definitely value this rich conversation. Now, where would you like to add anything to this topic, first of all?
No, I think we pretty well covered it. I mean, I could go on for a long time
Big
about
topic.
it, as we all could, but no, I think that's pretty much it in a nutshell for today.
Okay, where can people find you, Doug?
The easiest way to find me is direct to my website and simply Doug Thorpe, THORPE.com. My show is on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I've got all the web links all over my website. I'm all over LinkedIn and social medias, so easy to find. I'm happy to offer a free, introductory call conversation if a leader is curious, wants to do more with their own leadership effectiveness. Just reach out to me through the website and be happy to schedule something with you.
Yes, and I'll definitely add those links to the episode description. Now, yes, and definitely listeners, sign up or subscribe, I should say, subscribe to the YouTube channel, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Also subscribe to the Rise to Lead YouTube channel. And yes, would you like to share any last words of wisdom before we say goodbye today?
No, I would just challenge everybody that might be in a leadership role, and you don't have to have the title to be a leader. You can be an influencer at work by simply thinking about your opportunity to impact others and be that people person that can inspire others to kick into that next gear. That's what it boils down to.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much. We all need to lead our lives and our careers as well. So ideally we are leaders in that arena at least, right? And there's so
Right.
many other opportunities where we can be leaders on a daily basis in our communities, in our families, anywhere really. Thank you so much again for being on, sharing your wisdom with us today, Doug. Thanks to everyone listening, and we hope to have you on again in the next episode. Please share this podcast with other leaders, with other people in your circle who might benefit. And if you feel inspired, review it, give it a rating. Until next time. Thank you for tuning in to Rise to Lead. Keep shining your light, standing up for what's right, and inspiring others to step into their brilliance. If you like this episode, please give it a 5-star rating and subscribe to the Rise to Lead podcast on your preferred podcast app. Until next time, it's Regina Huber, and in the meantime, remember to rise to lead.